we jump into this, I want to share two quick stories. One of which is at the end of the interview, I asked Rocky, am I the only person who sat down with you for an interview that hasn't asked you about your 4 Super Bowl rings? To which he responded, yeah, you are. And I said, okay, good, let's keep it that way. And then the other story, and this is utterly cool, is he shares with me a part of his ESPN documentary trip to Vietnam that didn't make it into ESPN's documentary. That to me was the gold of the story. And it's just on the editor's floor at ESPN, which I cannot believe. I feel like they missed the gold of that story. But anyway, I got it, so it's an exclusive here on the Bravest Generation channel. And I'm excited to share it with you. So make sure you hang on, because he shares this story toward the end of the interview. So without further ado, here's Rocky. Recording. All right.
All
right, Rocky.
We all look good? Okay, fine.
All right, now my work is done. Now it's all on you.
Yeah, that's right. You know, serving your country, being in the military, even though you might have gone kicking and screaming at the time and given the conflict at that moment in time. But then there's a certain pride, being proud that you served your country. Right or wrong in maybe the conflict, but it was your country called or asked you and you served. And so there's a great feeling about having done that I don't think can be expressed in any other venture, even though you might do something in a service area, but then actually having served with your company throughout all the branches. And so, you know, and so there's that little camaraderie that you did, that 1% of the population serves their country, you know, at that time. And so we get to pick on all branches and everybody loves to do that, you know. So anyway, that becomes part of, and I think they feel a great responsibility about what this country stands for. And you may not like politics, but that's not what the country is. You know, it's giving back, and you did give your share, and you can be proud of doing that. From a fellow soldier point of view, from the experiences that the Vietnam veteran had, and the tags that they had to wear, and the response that they got, you know, to some degree I lived in a bubble because I came back in a sheltered little world. I got accepted to come back, or at least had a chance to. And the reality of that soldier was that he didn't. He had to come back against a hostile environment. People identified the war with the soldier, so he was spat upon, looked down upon. He had no place to go. American Legions, the VFW, didn't open their doors to the returning soldiers at that time. So where do they get a chance to talk? And they can't, and they have nobody to talk to. And so they had to repress all their feelings and go about their life as they best possibly can, and make the best of it. And so, you know, in my case specifically, well, I came to a high-profile business. So I became a story, and I was then asked or forced to talk about it. How do you feel? What did you think? How do you compare sports with the service? And all those kinds of analogies that took place. So for me, that was somewhat of a catharsis to be able to talk about it, unlike the other returning soldiers who couldn't do that or have an outlet to it. They couldn't even get together with other soldiers to even do that because everybody spread back to their own communities. But in my case, it became a story, and given the help of the Steel organization, given an opportunity, given a chance, then you win and you win some more and you win some more. And so it's a story that I told and have retold, through that period of time. And so I not that I had gone through it, but I can understand some of those frustrations that normal soldier had. Before we get to I think we have to touch base on what was happening back in the 60s as far as Vietnam is concerned. And because it's a period of time that the majority of those who served were in high school and then into college, and all that was taking place through that period of your life. So one part of your life was that you were just living it. So you're trying to get through whatever and wherever you were. So if you're like in high school, from 60 to 64. So all of a sudden things started to hear about Vietnam and rumbles, 1963 and 64, and it was there, just in the back of your mind, conflict going on. And then into our college years, or my college years, from 64 to 68, all of a sudden there's a nice an escalation in that war, and then there is more news about what is taking place, and then but you get your life, you're going at this time. You got a student deferment, those of us who were in college. And so the important thing was to get through there. Vietnam was happening, but it was a secondary thing. It was back over here that you didn't have to face, or that reality. Although I did have high school friends that dropped out of college or decided, had a job and then decided to enlist into the service as an option of their lives. But that was not the norm at that time. And so it really wasn't until the latter part of the 60s, at least for me, that people I knew started to be in Vietnam and then come back from Vietnam. And so in this case specifically, in my story, and we all have stories, and my story was that I got drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers out of the University of Notre Dame, very highly touted 16th round draft choice. I was the 417th person picked in the draft that year, so not high on their list, and I came to Pittsburgh. Probably the happiest day of my life during that training camp period was towards the end of training camp. Bill Austin was our head coach, and I was coming out of an offensive backfield meeting, and he said, "Rock, can I talk to you for a second?" And he pulled me aside. I'm thinking, whoa, what's going to happen? And he produced this letter that I said, "I'm sorry, it was accidentally opened." He said, "But we think you're good enough to make the team, and we will take care of this for you," whatever taking care of this meant. And it was my 1A classification for my student deferment, and now I was eligible for the draft, and that was in August of 1968. So in my mind, it was like, oh, okay. Now, I said, take care of this, only because in my mind, growing up in Appleton, Wisconsin, and being a big Packer fan, and the notoriety that they had received because of their championships that they won, is that their players would be in the reserve or the National Guard, and they would be at meetings, and so they would have pictures and so on and so on. So in my mind, it was like, well, I guess that's kind of like the natural step, that they'll get you into a reserve unit. And I didn't pay much attention, although it was the back of my mind, but I was just still trying to make that team, and I get to make the team, and we start the season, and September goes by, and now it's October, and so I hadn't heard anything about taking care of this, and so I stopped at the Steelers office and said, "Hey, have you heard anything about the possibility of a reserve unit or whatever?" And they said, "Well, we're having problems." Okay, Yeah, the senator got defeated, and the general retired, and so all their contacts, were kind of dispersed. And he said, "But don't worry, we're working on this," and so on. And I said, "Okay." So now it's more in the back of my mind, and nothing had taken place. And so then I transferred. I transferred draft boards from Wisconsin over here to Pittsburgh, and so that takes some time just to be able to draft that. And so I could remember the day was in December, and so I knew there was, it was just kind of like in the back of my mind, nothing had taken place. There was no nothing about a reserve unit or anything like this, and so when all of a sudden we have it in locker rooms, and let me just explain this, and it hasn't changed, but in a locker room is that they're all the same. So the lockers are up against the wall, players around the perimeter. In the middle is a laundry basket and a couple tables, and on one of the tables was like all the fan mail would be deposited for the players. And as I tell people, I said, well, when you're the 417th person picked, playing on a losing team, no one writes to you. My mother never even wrote me a letter. But anyway, so the equipment guy hollers, "Hey, Bleier, there's a letter here for you." So I stood up very quickly and sauntered over the table and perused through the mail and picked it up and opened it up. And it was, "Greetings. We'd like to inform you that you've been inducted into the armed services of your country." And it was my draft notification to report the next morning at 8 a.m. to be inducted into the service. All of a sudden, my breathing got shorter. I'm going, tomorrow? They're supposed to give you a week or something of the. Well, they did, post-dated. It was got lost in the mail, whatever. By the time it gets to the practice facility, it's the next day. So so anyway, I go tell the front office this is what it is. So we go down to the AFI station that afternoon, and we talk to the recruiting officer down there, and so they said, "Oh, you come tomorrow, we'll see you, what happens." Fortunately, they gave me 24 hours, and but that was it, to get my stuff together, to call home, say, "Hey, hi, goodbye," and make arrangements for my father to come out and get my stuff, and then you're gone. And so I'm like thousands of other young soldiers during that whole period of time that, got drafted. So I'm on a bus. We go down to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, then where we process in. Then I go to Fort Gordon, Georgia, where I put my basic and my advanced infantry training. Those period of time, got a 2-week break, got my orders to report to San Francisco, and to head over to Vietnam. So I got 2 weeks to go home, say hi, goodbye, and found me, and then went over into the country and found myself in Vietnam. Now, for me specifically, just during this period of time, probably as I look back, one of the benefits of maybe having only 24 hours to report the next day was that now you're just in a survival mode. And it was like every training camp that I've ever gone through beforehand, you go to training camp and it starts. And so basic training was that way, you become focused on what needs to be done. You go through all the harassment that takes place or the unknown, but you just kind of do it. And so actually that was a great training for me to be able to plow through that without any questions. And you just, yes, Sergeant, no Sergeant, and keep going on and keep going on. Even when you got your orders to go to Vietnam. So you get to Vietnam and, you go through the process there and center. So it was a week or so, and they go through a training program before you or assigned to your unit. And I got an assignment to my unit, and it was helicoptered out to the LZ in which they were then stationed. Now, I didn't know, so I got there, and no one was there. The policy then thereafter, which I became very much a part of, was that as the company you were assigned to you would work in an area of operation, you would work off landing zones, and so between the landing zones, and the landing zones were on top of a hill, and they were where the artillery was to cover the area in which you were operating. And so we worked out of two areas called LZ West and LZ Siberia. And so they happened to be up on West at the time. And so so the process is that as you're pulling bunker guard, every day a platoon from the company would then take a sweep off the side of the hill, cover an area, and then come back up and spend the evening, and then next day another platoon, and so on. And so that was the daily rotation. Anyway, I was assigned to the first platoon, Charlie Company, and they were out on a sweep, so I was waiting for them. And so then they made their way up late in the afternoon. And as they came up, it was like, to me, like every World War II movie I ever saw as a kid, and the image that you had as those soldiers, and the best that they could do, or the television that, they just were at that 1,000-yard stare. They looked older than they really were, they looked beaten, tattered, and so on. And it was like an eye-opener for me, like, oh man. Anyway, so that was our unit, and our unit was, as I had made mention, we were the first platoon. I was in the first squad of the first platoon of Charlie Company, 4th of the 31st Infantry, the 196th Brigade, the Americal Division, as it goes. And so that was, and then all of a sudden you're there and doing and surviving and taking one day at a time and doing what needs to be done at that moment.
Gets real very quickly, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So my specific role was so anyway, I'm a new guy. I was the first new guy that got into that company in 3 months. And so Tom Murphy, Captain Murphy, who was the head of the company, who was our company commander, was talking to the first lieutenant of the platoon, and said, "What do you need? Well, okay." Anyway, I ended up being a grenadier, and so I carried the M79 grenade launcher. And for those who'd served during that period of time, and they would know what that was. And just to explain, it was like a one-shot shotgun. It was a little snub nose, and you carried your rounds, you carried your grenades, and they looked like a big, thick bullet. They were like this, and so it was. And you'd break it in two, put a grenade in, shoot it from your shoulder, shoot it from your hip. But you had to carry your own weapon. So I had to carry 60 grenades with me whenever we were going on a hike at times. During the day, I didn't. I only had to carry 30, so that was a big thing. But if we're going off into and so what we would do is that we would be up there for a week or so, and then we'd be in the valley for a week or so. Then we'd be up on the opposite LZ for a week or so, and then we'd come back. And it was just that kind of rotation that would take place. So that was my that was the weapon that I carried.
Okay, and how much training did you have on that grenade launcher?
Oh yeah, maybe a week. So it was you would shoot. When you were going through AIT, you'd have to become proficient with the M16, the rifle, and you would get to shoot the M79 as a part of that. Not that you become so. It was like Kentucky windage. It was like, shooting off your hip, saying okay, and it was a weapon that was used for a distance 100 yards, 150 yards away from you, okay, or you had to get up over a building, and so you'd say, okay, let's see if we can lob some grenades over there, and that was your job.
Okay. And how heavy was 60 grenades? You're carrying around 60 grenades. The launcher. How heavy was all about?
Well, that it was kind of interesting. So I would think, one grenade, was maybe, I don't know if it was maybe half a pound. Maybe it was a half a pound, maybe a little bit more in a grenade. You stuff them in your thing, so you carry. So it was an extra 30 pounds that you maybe had to carry at the time. But then you had to carry everything else in your rucksack as well, and so that was anyway. Prior to the conflict that I got injured in, or the firefight in which I got wounded, was that there was something going on. Okay, you have to understand, I'm a private. And most of us were, at the time. We weren't privileged to all the information that came down, and you just did whatever was told of you to do at the time. So, but anyway, what was going on was that ultimately, and I didn't find this out until afterwards, until after I came back and so on, and when you start looking at it, was that there was a movement out of Vietnam, out of North Vietnam, of a regiment that was coming down, and they were coming down to our area, Hep Duc, to take that over, or to basically take it over. And so anyway, they came down single file into our area. So there was intelligence going on, that there was a movement taking place and it was coming down here. So everything, and then we didn't really know anything until when we were placed on 24-hour alert. Okay, fine, something is going on. And we were on LZ Siberia at the time, as I recall. And all of a sudden we are on 24-hour alert. Nobody's sleeping, everybody's up, and because there's some enemy activity. So Delta Company, or Bravo Company, I should say, Bravo Company was out in the field. We were up in LZ. And so all of a sudden, as I got all this information, there was a what we called a Chuhoi, a North Vietnamese soldier giving himself up. And so he came in, into the group. They interrogated him about, and so he spilled the beans that there were, up other places. I will take you to where they are. And so they took everybody out of that where they were, and started going after the NVA that were, and it was a trap. And so all of a sudden they pulled most of that company out, and they got in a firefight, and they retreated. And so now they're in a fight. Now we got, so we're up in LZ, Siberia, the word comes down, we're mobilizing, helicoptered out into the field. So get ready, boom, and we all jumped on helicopter, we came down. Our responsibility was now to go help Bravo Company to get out of this situation. And by the time we got down, by the time you get everybody together and start moving through the jungle, it became later and later at night. I can remember tracers going on, a firefighting going on. I can see our helicopters picking up the wounded and basically the wounded, and carrying them out of there. And I could see tracers hitting the helicopters, late at night. We finally got there, and so our responsibility was to get them out of there, full front and rear security. Let's move them out of there. So they already know what the meaning the enemy, knew what the location was, and so we just don't want to stay there because they would start putting mortars into that area later on. So we're pulling them out. So we had to and started to carry their dead out, our fellow soldiers. And so that was, and all of a sudden there was, it was a body. So I gave somebody my grenade launcher. I grabbed somebody else. I said, come on, let's take this body out. And we were carrying this body. And it basically was a bamboo pole. We used our boot strings to tie him to the pole. And now we're carrying him out over the rice paddies. And as we approached, there was a stream in which we had to cross to get to the other side. As we approached it, all of a sudden, there was another firefight that erupted. Boom, we dropped the bodies and we just dive into the rice paddies until we were safe enough. And the word was, we're moving out, leave the bodies, and we'll come back later. So we get to, and we cross. Anyway, we cross the stream and we take off, and we finally catch up with the rest of the company, and we set up a night position somewhere, and I don't know what it was. Okay, so now a day goes by. Now the day later, we got some reinforcements that came in, and we are now going to go back and retrieve the bodies. So that was our company, and actually it was a reinforced platoon. So the commanding officer, Captain Murphy, in our platoon was going to go back to get those bodies, and we catch up with everybody else later on. And so that's what we did. We, all of a sudden we got to that area, and we had just taken a break in the covered part of the jungle before we walked onto this open rice paddy, get our location. And so, like everything else, the word was to keep 5 yards distance between one another, keep your eyes and your ears open. Obviously, the enemy are around. And we had a point man who was a new guy, basically. Not that I had ever walked point, but he was walking point. I was 8th in line, and I remember that. We had 5 yards distance, so he was maybe 40 yards in front of me, and we're walking onto that rice paddy, or into the area where the rice paddies and on the dikes, when all of a sudden he saw movement across the burn, and he hollered, "Gook, gook," and shots broke the stillness, and it happened so quickly. They started to run. He started to chase them and pulling everybody out into the middle of that rice paddy as we followed, not knowing what was taking place, when all of a sudden a machine gun started to level the area, and then guys are just going shoo, into those paddies as best they can to get some coverage, and and it happened so quickly, and is that it goes, okay, that's what took place. I'm there. I crawl on my hands and knees to the end of the rice paddy. I see 4 guys that were pinned down out in the open in another rice paddy. It was kind of a tiered level. And I saw where the machine gun was. It was about 150 yards away, up on a hillside, covering that whole area. My responsibility was to get some firepower on that position. So I rolled over, breached my grenade, sighted it up, and that's when I felt the thud for the first time and got hit. And it was kind of like, oh, that hurt. And I thought at the same time, the soldier behind me was hollering, "Rock!" And I thought he threw a rock at me just to get my attention, to get out of there or whatever it was. And but that was not the case. And so anyways, so we got a tourniquet, and we tied it off quickly and the band on it. But now we had to get some firepower still going on. So I just moved over a little bit out of that open area behind some hedgerows, and so we hopefully got enough firepower. We tried to get some grenades in that area, and then it was, all of a sudden, the 4 guys that were pinned down got out of there, so they were good. But it was an interesting thing, as I recall, is that all of a sudden there was this quietness. I mean, all of a sudden it was just quiet. No fighting, no shooting. And I was sitting there, and then you start thinking about, oh, okay, what's going to happen? Then you start thinking about a lot of things. And one of the things that went through my mind, it's interesting, one of the things that went through my mind at that moment of time was my 6th grade teacher, Sister Hilaire, and all the stories that she told us about those soldiers in Korea in World War II. That when the blood started to flow, they started making deals. You get me out of here, I'll become a priest. You get me out of here, I'll build you a hospital. You get me out of here, I'll do great things. And all of a sudden, you're there. And I'm sure I'm not the only soldier that had that feeling every time. And so it was like, well, bite the bullet, you get me out of here, and I'll become I wasn't going to become a priest. Okay, fine. So we changed that. We just get me out of here as best you possibly can. And the best thing is, you get me out of here, you got my life. You do with what you want. Okay, fine. I won't complain about anything, So, so then we dropped back. So then we dropped back, the medic and I, and we crawled back to our commanding officer, and we set up another defensive position, okay, up there on the hillside. And then some of the soldiers eventually would start crawling back in from the rice paddies and so on. But then so did the North Vietnamese, and they probed our perimeter. And so they got close enough, and I was sitting, much like I'm sitting here on a little berm, and I'm talking to our commanding officer, Tom Murphy's off to the right. There's another soldier over here who's a medic, and he's and I'm just sitting here, we're talking about what's going on. When all of a sudden somebody hollers, "Grenade," and you react. So I just grenade, and I fall off this side onto my side, and the grenade goes off, and it goes off behind me right here. And then a second one comes in, and I'm lying against this berm, and I could see it out of the corner of my eye, and it comes in and hits my commanding officer, Tom Murphy, right in the middle of the back, and it bounces right off of him, just boom, and you see it, and it rolls right between you, and your only reaction is to jump out of the way, and as I did, it blew up, and I was standing on top of it. It blew up through my right foot, and both my legs, and shrapnel ripped through there. And then we were in another firefight. And it's kind of interesting because it's the natural reaction of your body, and adrenaline takes over, and you're just reacting to a situation, and the pain is kind of there, but it's not there, and it's just, you're doing as the best you possibly can. I move out of that position, and so anyway, all of a sudden, after a period of time, there was a burst of fire that came from the enemy position onto ours, and then it went away. And I don't know. And all of a sudden they retreated for whatever reason. And then we had a sister platoon finally fight its way in, and they came to pull front and rear security. Now, half of our unit was either dead or wounded because of that. And so they carried us out of there, and they started carrying us out of there. Now, so one of the soldiers from the other platoon, you know, he comes in. He said, "Oh, Rock, you all right? Oh, good." He said, "Because we heard over that you bought it, you and Captain Murphy." He said, "No, I'm glad to go." He said, "Don't worry." He said, I'll get you out of here. You'll be the first guy I get you out of here." And he goes away and he comes back. He said, "No, you'll be the second guy. I have to take Captain Murphy first." I go, "Okay." I said, "Okay, fine." So, and then because of that, they carried me on a poncho liner. Now, just to put that things in it, so it's late in the afternoon. They also had their own firefights to get to where we were. They had been up as long as we had been up, and now they have to start carrying the wounded out as best we possibly can, and everybody else in Profund. You know, so adrenaline works well for a period of time, but then when it starts to wear off all the way around, so the night went on, and it got to a point where they said, "Well, we can't drag you any further, and don't worry, so we'll send a stretcher back and get you." And this stretcher didn't come. The stretcher didn't come. And it wasn't a long period of time, as I recall. It wasn't a long period of time, but then all of a sudden, a fellow soldier, who I did not know, a black soldier, picked me up and threw me over his shoulders and started carrying me out. And he carried me all the way to the helicopter. So he would carry me, and we'd stop. He'd catch his breath. He had blood all over him, for me, and then he eventually got me to the point. But the moral of the story is that I didn't know who he was.
Did you ever catch his name?
No, never. Didn't know where he lived. I didn't know his name or any of that.
Brother in arms.
Yeah, brother in arms. So, anyway, so then we get, so we're in a helicopter, and so Captain Murphy, he caught that grenade shrapnel up between. So we're on the helicopter together. I'm holding him. He's worse off than I am at the time, and so we go to an aid station where we get patched up, and then I go to Da Nang. I spent 2-3 days in Da Nang, where we before I go to Tokyo. Then I spent 3 weeks in the hospital in Tokyo before I came back to the States, and I spent 9 months in the hospital back in the States during that period of time. So, so my period of time of being in Vietnam really wasn't that long. I was there for 4.5 months, compared to, my fellow soldiers who had been there for their 12-month deployment or multiple deployments as they had chosen to go back. And so it was but there's a couple of things that happen in that period of time, and it all ties into maybe what the brotherhood of that you share, like on teams and so on, is that people that touch your lives and change your lives, that have an impact on your lives, come out of nowhere. And I tell the story when I was in Da Nang. He's just right out of the field. He got an IV morphine drip, tubes in your body, and all those questions that go through your mind of Why me? Now what? Where am I going to go? What's my life going to be like? Da, 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 and so on. And, and as the story goes, across from me was a young soldier. He was a triple amputee. He lost his left arm and both legs. And every day, and I was only there for a couple days, the aides would come to take him to therapy. And I would see him grab that little trapeze that swung over his bed, and he'd help swing his torso into the wheelchair, and they'd get him into the wheelchair, and they would push him to therapy. And he stopped at all the beds, and he stopped at my bed, and he stopped, and he goes, "Hey, how you doing today? You look better today than you did yesterday when you got here. Because when you got here yesterday, let me tell you, you look like shit. Now we got some good docs here. They're going to take care of you, and I'll see you back in the real world one of these days." And you go, wow. To me, at that moment, I'm going, well, if anybody could complain about their lot in life, would be that young soldier. But he chose to kind of have a positive attitude, and I thought, wow, what a difference it made just in if he could feel that way, then what about me? I'm going to walk someday. And so then we got to Tokyo, and there was an incident in Tokyo with my doctor specifically. And when after a couple of weeks, I was there, and I finally worked up enough courage to ask him whether he thought I could come back and play this game of football again because of the injuries that I sustained. Now, his response was something like this. Don't worry. You're going to have a normal life. You're going to be able to do the things that normal people do. Don't expect to get back on the gridiron, because you just won't have the strength nor the flexibility to do the things that are necessary to be a running back in the NFL. So what he had formulated, from his own opinion, and what he had was a negative. What he did was just suck that hope that I had, and as my authority figure, right or not, wrong in his analysis, but he just said, "Pooh," he just sucked that hope out. 2 days later, you talk about why things happen. 2 days later, I get a postcard in the mail. Simple postcard. It's got 2 lines on it. It says this: "Rock, team's not doing well. We need you. Art Rooney, owner of the team." Wow, somebody needs me. No, they didn't need me. Somebody just took the time to care and reach out. And what a difference that it made. And so then from that period of time, then I go back to the States, and I'm at Fort Riley, Kansas, and at the hospital there, and until I able to depart the service and try to come back and play football.
Try to come back.
That's right. Well, yeah, so the biggest thing was, I wrote Mr. Rooney another letter, at the time, and see whether I could be invited to come back during a training camp, and that in 1970. So this was 1970, and he said, "I'll talk to Dan," his son, who is now president of the club and so on. He said, "I'll talk to Dan, and we'll see what happens." So I come back. So when I came back from Vietnam, I weighed 165 pounds. So I had to put weight back on. I had to try to get some strength back, and so I had got on a regiment, even though I was attached to the hospital and not released, because there's nothing that they could do, and so I could start walking, I could start jogging, I could start running again, and because my whole focus was trying to come back, maybe because somewhere in that year, I thought, okay, fine, I could get an early out, if I got, at the time, if you were on combat injured duty, you could get like a 3-month early out. So I thought, oh, maybe I could get out in September, and come back to the Steelers of, at that time, how naive I was. But they had just changed, the process was, they had just changed the, unbeknownst to me, I remember, and it's just as things take place. So I'm working out. I'm going to the gym as my best possibly can. At Fort Riley, Kansas, I'm still attached to the hospital, and I see my doctors, and so all of a sudden it was in July, and I run into a friend of mine that I had met there, and who worked in personnel, and he said, hey, they just passed a bill, you can get an early out. They were downsizing, this was 19, they were downsizing the military. He said, you can get an early out. I said, oh, yeah, like when? He goes, like tomorrow. I said, you're kidding me. No, he said, you just, because you're still on combat active duty, your attachment for your last deployment, it was that, and so and they're giving early outs for people with that. And I go, oh, okay, fine. Wow, so that was, and so I went back to training camp in July of that year, and they were, and being the family that they were, and the team that they were, they let me go through training camp. And Chuck Noll was a brand new head coach the year before, and so eventually they had put me on injured reserve. Kindness of them, put me on injured reserve. I had another operation by their doctors with the shrapnel that I still had in my legs and my foot, and so they bought me a year. And the following year I came back, and then I made the taxi squad, or as we now call it, the developmental squad. And so I hung around, but they bought me 2 years, basically bought me 2 years of, as I tell people, of an opportunity. And you have to do something with that, so you have to work out, you got to get a chance, and, so I come back, and the following year, now this is 1972, and a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, and so I make the team, primarily on special teams, so I've hung around for a couple years so they could see this change and progress, so I make the special teams. And then, and it's an interesting side note, it just not from a military point of view, but from an evolution of professional football as we see it today at that moment in time. In 1972, the Steelers hired their first stretching coach. And by 1973, they hired their first weightlifting coach. And so you would think like, oh, isn't that just part of the, evolution? But yeah, so it has to start somewhere anyway. So in 1973, I come back again at that time, and I become bigger and stronger and faster than I had before. So speed was an important thing because I had good speed, but so I had to work on my 40 time, and there's a whole story about that. And I did, and I worked on it, and then I worked on my strength too. So in 1973, I came back to the Steelers. I went from 165 pounds and I weighed 218 pounds. I bench pressed 465 pounds. I squatted 600 pounds. And I ran the 40. Now, unlike today's, but for me, I ran the 40 timed in 4.55, 4.6, and 4.65, which was really good for me at that time and impressive for them, and to be able to see the changes. And part of maybe my hanging around was to see what had taken place when I came back, 1970, and then 71, and then 72, and then 73, and so I got a chance to make the team again in 73. So then there was a period of time, it just, like all of us, and is that then you start to question, I mean, for me, as I was going, and I made the team in 73, carried the ball once during that season. Okay. I had 68, 69 I was in Vietnam, 70 I was struggling to come back, 71, 72, 73, and you go, where's my future? And to make the team, I was going to have to fight with every free agent, and that was my thought process coming out of 73, going into 1974. And I thought maybe to make the team again in 1974, I was going to have to fight with every free agent, draft choice, and rookie to do so. And I didn't think that was fair, not that life's fair. And I thought, well, maybe my life's going in another direction. And I did come back. I did make the team, got a chance to play. Maybe not to the level I thought, but hey, that wasn't part of the deal in the rice paddy, and so I left the team after 73. Tried to find my life's work. I was in Chicago selling life insurance out of an agency. And when I got a call from a teammate of mine, Andy Russell, who was coming in Chicago, he was captain of the football team with the Steelers, and there was a big sports dinner taking place, sponsored by the NFL, Boys and Girls Club. Guys are coming from all over the league, and he called and said, hey, why don't you join us, and so on. Well, that's a decision you make. I'm not going back. So I declined. He pushed, I declined some more, and he pushed some more. Then he asked me, why? And the only thing I could blurt out was well, I quit. I'm not going back. And he said, you can't quit. He said, if you quit, think about this. You've already made a decision for that coaching staff. Do you like them well enough to make decisions for them? He said, no, your responsibility, if this is what you want to do, is that you go back and you make them make a decision. You give them every reason to either keep you or release you, but you don't cut yourself. The reality of the game is that we're all expendable. The reality of the game is we all can be cut at any time. But if this is what you want, then you don't cut yourself. And maybe it was just the arm twisting I needed, and I went back. But everything that took place that I perceived would take, and I did have to fight with every free agent, draft choice, and rookie once again to be able to make the team. And I made the team. As I tell people, I was the 5th running back out of 4 at the beginning of the season. So you have the greatest generation that came back in that war and the conflict, from both sides of the sea, and they came back heroes and victors in every place that was around. There were stories told them, there were movies made about that experience, and so they were so duly honored and thanked all the time. And that Vietnam veteran got lost in that. And to some degree, even the Korean veteran as well, as an offshoot of World War II, was kind of lost within that realm of what their contribution was, and kind of got tied in because some of them became, Vietnam veterans or fought in that war as well. So projects like this become very important because that stories need to be told and need to be reinforced, and whether or not it doesn't have. And so, and my other thing is that it doesn't have to be combat. Not everybody went to Vietnam. People ended up in Germany. People ended up around the world. People ended different things. And the fact is, you still have a story. You don't have to be in combat to be able to say, hey, yes, look at me, I fought over there. No, it's like, okay, no, I was in Germany, and this is what I did, and this is the story, and this is, the reaction or whatever it is, because all that is important in how you're viewed and by other generations, those stories.
And they were at the ready. There were 6 million at the ready. They could have been deployed in country, and they were supporting those who were in country.
That's right. Yeah, they were in the service at the time. You know, through the luck of a draw or whatever it is, they ended up somewhere else. You know, and they should and they should be proud of the fact that they ended up someone else. You know, and that's and because it's all part of the deal. All right, so.
Did you ever take the camaraderie you had in Vietnam into your football career?
Yeah, you know, it's kind of because the camaraderie I had really developed out of sports. So from playing organized sports from junior high and high school, in college, and then even into the pros, you know, the comparison is this, you know, a locker room is a locker room. I don't care what level you're playing at. The military is the military. I don't care what level you are or what war or wherever you're stationed. It's still the same. You go through basic training. You have stories. You know, you have people you like, you don't like, stupid things that take place. You know, those are all part of that experience that needs to be shared or talked about, you know, and so on. So the unfortunate thing, see here, this is the unfortunate thing about Vietnam War, is that unlike today or unlike recently in the Middle East, where units trained together, deployed together, served together, and came back together and went through that cycle every 3 years of that nature. Vietnam was a replacement. The only original guys went over in 63, 65, I think, by the time the division went over. And that was the only time. Everybody else was a replacement. You know, you just came in, you didn't know these guys from all over the world, or all over the country, you know, different parts, which is fine. And, you know, and so you were put into a situation, you know, you didn't get to know their families, you didn't know who they were, you know, you might be hanging around when will call would come, because you might get a package that you had to share with the rest of the guys in your platoon or squad or whatever it might. And so, and then that's it. And you had nicknames, you know, because everybody kind of knew it was transitional and short-lived. You know, I'm going to be here and I'm going to be gone. You know, and so you just operated on that kind of level. Well, you know, so you know, the interesting thing for me was, you know, people go, well, how do you react in that kind of a situation? You know, I mean, okay, the majority of people in this world never found themselves in a combat situation, being fired upon or having to fire on somebody else, and it's a unique situation. And it was like, well, how do you react? And one of the things I kind of thought was, you kind of react who you are. I think who you are. If you're going to panic, well, you're going to panic anywhere in this world, no matter what the situation is. And so it was during that period of time, I was in that rice paddy as well. And all of a sudden, you know, it was like, it was silent. I was looking around and I was thinking, okay, what if? All right, what if? Now, I'm in the rice paddy. There was a pathway off to my left that kind of went around the rice paddies. And I'm thinking, okay, fine. If you're out there and you're the enemy, are you going to try to surround us? Well, maybe if you're going to surround us, you might be coming down this pathway, which I happen to be by. And I'm thinking to myself, all right, you got a grenade launcher. You don't have an automatic weapon. You don't even have a pistol. You got a one-shot deal. And so one of the things they gave us was like a shotgun shell that had a blast, like a shotgun shell rather than like a grenade. And so I breached that, thinking to myself, if they come down around the corner there, if I see somebody peek, I'm hoping they are as scared as I am. Being human, maybe they are. And so if I see somebody peek around that, I'm gonna blast it with my one shot and then hightail it as best I possibly can with these banged up legs in the opposite direction. And hopefully that that they retreated far enough to get me out of there. I'm only based on human reaction under the circumstances. And so that was my thought process. Obviously it didn't happen, but I was thinking, so then all you're thinking about all the situations that could take place, what about this? And it was like when that grenade hit the first time and we had a cluster of guys right here all around me at the front of where our platoon was. And I'm thinking, well, if they can get one grenade or two grenades, they can get three grenades, and they're gonna throw them where there's a cluster of guys. So I crawled out of there and found myself a space away from the cluster and still trying to do my duty at the same time. And so that was it. But it was like, okay, let's assess the situation. I'm not going to hang around these guys. Well, they did. So one was on the radio, two was, so one of the sergeants had to take place, and then, and one of the platoon lieutenants came over then. So there was like two or three guys. Captain Murphy was still there because he was wounded, and they tried, but it was just like, I'm thinking, oh, there's a cluster. Where are they going to direct their fire on the cluster?
Yes, on the cluster. Well, that was smart.
So ESPN asked if I would go back, and so we talked about it. I go, well, why? Why one? And so they gave their reasons, and I said, okay, fine, and anniversary was coming up. It was like the 50th anniversary, and so it would be a great story about going back and so on. And I said, okay. I said, listen, I don't know really. I said, for 40 years or almost 50 years, I've had the chance to tell my story or to tell the story. So I don't know what to expect. I don't know what you should expect, but from a cathartic point of my life, I've dealt with all that stuff. So, we'll go back and see what it's like. And it was kind of a whirlwind trip for us to do that, and so they had set it up, and we flew back, and I got to Vietnam on a Saturday, and then Sunday was kind of a rest day because it took us a couple days to travel there. And then Monday we were going out to the location of where the firefight took place, out in the rice paddy. And so it was kind of interesting. I said, okay, fine. So we're in an air-conditioned van and we're driving and we're going, all right, fine. And I'm sitting by the window and I'm looking out, and it's like the hustle and bustle of change. So there's activity, there's people, there's motor scooters, there's cars, there's highways, there's buildings being built, there's townships, it's moving on. And so we're driving by, and I see this big hillside off to the left. And I asked somebody, well, what is that? And he said, well, that's LZ West. I go, LZ West? I said, we used to take sweeps off of LZ West. Down in here, it was just, it was all jungle and rice paddies and little villages and so on. And, and we'd go back up. And so it's consciously or subconsciously, it was just a thought that was in my mind. And we finally get to the location that they had pinpointed of where this action took place. So we had to find, Now, it wasn't as if we spent like 2 weeks there. It wasn't like we spent hours there. And so now, 50 years later, or 49 years later, trying to well, it looked the same as I recall. There's a little roadway, and the rice paddies were still there. Hedgerow was still there. There's another rice paddy on the other side. There's a hillside over here. I think this is it. I think this is it. So I'm going through it. Yeah, pretty sure this is what I recall in that short period of time. So we do. So then we start the interview. So Tom Rinaldi, the host, and so we're standing in the rice paddy, and then he asks the one question, how do you feel? Out of nowhere, all of a sudden, I get this emotional feeling. I mean, I could feel it coming up from the soles of my feet, through my legs, through my groin, into my body. And I don't know where this feeling's coming from. And I start to cry. Part of my mind, having spent the 2 days in July, before we went down, seeing the people, seeing the activity. They love Americans. They're still a communist country. And in my mind is like, why? Why? We lost 58,000 people. For what? And it's the for what that I didn't grasp, but it was the emotion that was for what? Good or bad? For what? But we lost these people. Would they still be the same today if we had not had been there? Possibly. And so it was, whoa, to the extent that I started to cry, and as I was, it was like my body was flushing out all this emotion, and to the point where I just felt sick. And so Tom comes over and he said, come on, let's go sit down. So I sit down and my blood pressure drops like that. I faint. And they come up. Could have been 10 seconds, whatever it was. So then I have the whole film crew looking at me like, did he die? It's like, oh my goodness gracious, what just took place there? And so then we put this on hold, but so from the emotional point of view, it's like, okay, I had to flush my body, but my thought process thereafter, so we went back to Da Nang. I think we were July. We went back to, I think we were in Da Nang. We went back, and so I had to go to the hospital. They had we lost another day because of that, and so on. But the thought and the emotion was the same of why, and it gave me an insight, maybe just a slight insight, of those people, or soldiers, or first responders, that all of a sudden suffer from post-traumatic stress, because it can happen at any time. From the stress factor, happen at any time, and all of a sudden one day, things are fine. You open the door and you step off a ledge, and it gave me a great appreciation for those who suffer it on a constant basis, of what that feeling was like, just of why, of loss, and there's nothing you could do about it. And so that was, for me, that was an emotional eye-opener of how it can affect, and it gave me a great sense of sensitivity or thought in those who suffer that or have those effects. And it doesn't happen right away, and it can happen at any time. So anyway, now we lose a day because of my fainting episode, and we have to go back. So that was Sunday, that was Monday, Tuesday, now it's Wednesday, and it's our last day of shooting. So we're gonna go back, and we went back to finish the story in the rice paddies and so on. Let me just, first part of the story, just the first part of the story, if I may.
Of course.
Is that we were having a meeting, an interview with myself and a North Vietnamese soldier who was in the regiment that we fought against, not that he was there, and the former mayor of Hep Dak, and he was at his house, and this is where we're gonna shoot this interview, and so we had an interpreter. You know, the sad thing about it was that we had to work through an interpreter, but it wasn't like two guys that were talking, two soldiers that were talking about whatever thing. It was pretty much, you know, a rhetoric, you know, and from their point of view, they were very happy to be able to do this. From their point of view, that we were enemies at one time, but now we're friends, you know, and we changed this kind of stuff. And, you know, we really didn't get into the nitty gritty. So, but it was now the lesson I learned there, which is a universal lesson. We did this, took pictures, you know, had our story told. And so the interpreter comes and he says, Mr. Two has to leave. Why? My interpreter went to Penn State. And so he was kind of I said, why? Because his wife's mad. I go, what do you mean? Well, their granddaughter, his birth is today, and they're having a family gathering today, and he's not there, and they have everybody over, and all I could picture in my mind was the universal story of going, you're what? You're going over to the mayor's house for what? To talk to an American soldier from 50 years ago? Or what? You know? And so it was like, so she got mad. So she got mad at him for being gone all morning when there was a family. And all of a sudden I started laughing. He didn't know I was laughing. I said, it's universal. I don't care where you are. You know, it's you just get, anyway. So we were back. So then we went from there over to back to the story. So we're finishing the story in the rice paddies. When out of the corner of my eye, I see this Vietnamese gentleman on his little motorbike coming up the pathway, and he stops. And he gets off, and he squats, and he's watching the film crew as we're going through the interview in the field. And so we kind of break up, and we're heading back in, and somebody says, well, why don't you talk to him? I go, well, get the interpreter, and I'll talk to him. And he was a slightly built older gentleman, and squatted down, and so I get up to him, and in English, he says, Bravo Company, 4th of the 31st, Marical, July. I go, what? He said, Bravo Company, 4th of the 31st, Marical, July. And I go, okay, well, I get the interpreter, and we talk Well, he was the scout for Bravo Company at the time when we were in that rice paddy, and he lives there, just up the road. He's got a little farm that he stayed. And I thought, what are the chances of this taking place? You know, of running into their Vietnamese scout that was there at the time and was a part of this. And as unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to really do an interview or talk to him about it because we had to pack up and leave because we were leaving that day or that night to get out of there. And I regret it now after all these times just to be able to sit. Because he said, you know, come stop at my place, and we just couldn't do that. But anyway, I go, wow. And I would have liked to have gotten his reactions. So over the years I have, and especially now, with the Memorial Day coming up, and we just I got one coming up. Is 10 years ago we had the veterans here in my community in Mount Lebanon, over at the park. We built a veterans memorial for that, so we got a 10th year anniversary that's coming up, and so I will speak over there. And then we have the wall coming up in Erie, and then it'll be in Butler, and so I'll be traveling wall, so I will speak there. So yes. How we approach conflict, and it's two different things. From a political point of view, that you can have an opinion on the politics of conflict, even what's happening today. So how do you feel about Russia and Ukraine? Should we do more? People have an opinion about that. And it's different than having actually to be there and experience that, or be a soldier in that conflict or in that arena. So it becomes, and so my point is that it's easy to say thank you when you have no skin in the game.
I was at a nice event, the Great American Summit in Texas in January, and Jason Redman, Navy SEAL,
right?
He was there speaking, and so he asked for any of the Vietnam veterans in the audience to stand up, and it was just, of course, the two guys that I was with. They stood up, and he went on for about 5 minutes just giving them praise and saying, it's because of you we are better soldiers.
Right, yeah.
Because of you, we're a better country.
Yeah.
We'll never disrespect our returning soldiers
Right,
again.
yeah.
And it was so, I'm like Mama Bear here. It was so nice to see them get publicly recognized. And of course the whole place, stood up and then ended up giving them a standing ovation. And all that. It was just beautiful. And it was so good to see that out of the young guy,
right,
Jason Redmond.
Yeah. And I still run into, the veterans that can't talk about it, or won't talk about it.
Right.
And just say, I can't talk about it,
Yeah.
I go, oh man.
And
so I get, I get responses, even today, that my dad was in Vietnam, or my uncle was in Vietnam, and they never talk about it, and it becomes difficult if you don't talk about it, and so and that's why films like this are so very important for the soldiers, to be able to have a chance to be able to tell their stories, or to be able to share their stories, because those are the stories that carry on from generation to generation. And so if your kids don't understand what your feelings were, good or bad, about that experience, well, how do they be able to make choices later on? What are what decisions do they make, you know?
Pretend, yeah, you're good. And we'll just pretend we're posing. But it'll be a movie, and then when I, oh, and you can
That's the way you do it.